welcome to another video. Today was an absolutely gorgeous day. The sun was shining, I put up my Christmas tree, I had a really nice long Skype chat with my family, and I thought what better way to finish the day than to talk about the much anticipated sequel to Serpent and Dove, which is Blood and Honey by Shelby Mahurin. If you've read this book, you might know what an absolute train wreck it was. I was honestly really disappointed the entire way through reading this. I think I probably skim read the last 150 pages or so. I just really could not wait for it to be over. And the whole time I was reading it, I just couldn't help think about all the things that were so great about the first book that this book just kind of ruined. So I feel like I want to film this video today to talk about what went wrong, why the first book was good, why the sequel was not so good, and just get a few things off my chest. Firstly, I do want to say that I really did enjoy Serpent and Dove, and there's a reason that I went out and bought the sequel to this book, so absolutely no hate to the author. I know how hard it is to write a book, but there was just a few problems with this one that I just need to put a spotlight on. In my opinion, the overarching issue with Blood and Honey is the many inconsistencies there are between the first book and the second book. This can be divided into four main categories, which are language, plot, setting, and characters. I'm going to delve into each of those four categories in a little bit more detail and go over my main concerns. Firstly, the language of Blood and Honey. There was such a sudden shift between the types of language used in the first book and the second book, and I just couldn't really wrap my head around why this had happened. So in the second book, we're introduced to this kind of weird Cockney accent that some of the poorer characters or the more rough criminal characters have. They sort of talk like, "What are you talking about, mate?" They have that kind of an accent, and this was not present in the first book, so I'm more just really confused why this was added into the second book, because we definitely had some lower class characters in the first book, so I don't think it was just an absence of that. Like those two characters who chase after Lou and she ends up murdering in the blacksmith shop in the first book, they could have easily had that British accent to make it consistent between the first and second books, but they didn't have that. So the introduction of that was a little bit jarring for me, and I didn't really understand why she chose to make her characters talk that way. Secondly is the use of French terminology in this book. As you might know from reading this series, all of the nouns are French. So all of the place names, city names, landmarks have French names. Like L'Eau Mélancolique or La Forêt des Yeux, they all have French names. So it stands to reason that the characters would have a basic familiarity with the French language. Now, it could just be that people who used to live in this city spoke French, and then English-speaking people moved in, which is why the characters all need to translate what the French word is into English, like La Forêt des Yeux, the forest of eyes. They translate that either for the characters or for the reader to understand what the words are. But if that's the case, then why do some of the characters swear in French? In the first book in particular, Lou swears a lot in French to the Archbishop and other characters, so it stands to reason that these characters can speak a little bit of French. It was my understanding on reading the first book that the whole city spoke French and it had just been magically translated to English for the readers. However, in the second book, it appears that this is not the case, because there is a scene where Reed comes across this entrance called Nous tombons ton, and he has to have it translated for him. He doesn't understand what it means. This was incredibly confusing to me. I didn't understand why some of the characters knew what the words translated meant and some of the characters didn't, why some of the characters swore in French and some of them didn't. If there was an established dual language happening in the city, English and French, I think Mahurin should have done a better job of letting the reader know about that, because I just found it very confusing why some people had a British accent, why some people swore in French, yet others needed French words translated for them. It was just not very cohesive. I also want to give a brief mention to the types of swear words that some of the characters use. In particular, Lou says ass and shit so much. It honestly, it bugged me so much in the first book that as I was reading Blood and Honey, I actually went through and tabbed off in yellow all of the times that Lou says ass, because it bugged me so much. It turned out to only be 8 times, which I guess isn't horrible. It definitely niggled me more in the first book. In this book, I made it more of a game to spot how many times she says that swear word. But I just really would have loved a little bit more variety in the types of swearing that Mahurin used. Our second issue is with the setting. What made the first book so great, in my opinion, is the backdrop of the capital city, Caesarea. There are so many great locations that the characters go to, whether it's at the cathedral or Soleil-et-Lune or the patisserie. There's just a lot of exploration that the characters get to do in all of these great, vibrant, different parts of the city. And there's also a great contrast in the types of symbolism that these areas give us, where the cathedral is very holy, it brings to mind Reed, and then you have Soleil-et-Lune, the theater, which is very colorful and chaotic and glamorous, much like Lou. It really gives the reader a good symbolism and a good visual of these two different main characters. Blood and Honey, on the other hand, is very, very repetitive in the types of scenes it gives us. 90% of the book, I would say, is some form of camp or tavern. And I do include the theater troupe as a camp because they are camping outside. So it's just another form of camp. There's really not a lot of contrast in the kinds of scenes we get in this book, and I think it just makes it very dull and monotonous for us to just keep reading about characters going from camp to camp to camp. This kind of ties into my third point, which is the plot and the issues I had surrounding the plot of this book. I actually went through and paced out the different scenes so I could get a better understanding of how the characters move through the story. And the first 80 pages alone is all preamble. It's all them still at the camp that they were at the end of the first book. That's 80 pages where they're just deciding what to do, figuring out what to do. And not a lot happens. We don't get a lot of, character growth or interactions other than a few one-off jokes that don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. We do get a small scene of Reed and Lou sneaking off to have sex, and then there's a very minor battle that doesn't last very long. But overall, I just found it a very weak opening. Next, the main portion of the story, I'd say the mid 200, 300 pages, is all alternating between camps and taverns. We get the escape camp, we get a tavern, we get the circus camp, we get La Voisin Blood Witches camp, we get the wolf camp, and then after they sneak into the city, what's that? It's yet another tavern. The only real settings we have that aren't a camp or a tavern happen at the very end of the book. We get a little bit of castle, and then we get a little bit of catacombs. Overall, I was just skimming through the book waiting for something exciting to happen, but it's like, it might have worked if she had made the characters within those camps interesting or compelling, but they were very interchangeable to me, and they felt very much like secondary characters. These aren't people who are very important or that we need to know a lot about. They're just there to move the story along, so I wasn't that invested in all of these monotonous backdrops and these characters that I didn't really care that much about. Now, I do want to specifically mention a number of scenes that just didn't make a lot of sense to me while I was reading this book. I'm going to be reading excerpts from parts of these scenes just to get a little bit better understanding of exactly what I'm talking about. Some of this boils down to just childish writing, and other times I think it's actual plot inconsistencies or a lack of research and comparison between the first and second books that just makes it kind of a moment that I think just wasn't that well done. When our characters visit their first tavern of the book, there's a scene where Lou, Ansel, and Reed are sitting around a table having a drink and waiting to hear some information. After Reed rebuffs Lou's attempt to offer him a drink, the following happens. "How about you, Antoine?" Lou thrusts the tumbler toward Ansel instead. "You wouldn't let a lady drink alone, would you?" "Of course I wouldn't." He looked solemnly to the left and right. "But I don't see a lady here, do you?" Lou mustered a cackle and dumped the amber liquid over his head. And then we just immediately move on from that scene. Like, picture yourself at a bar with a friend, your friend cracks a joke, what do? You take your drink and dump it over his head? And then he says nothing about it? He doesn't go to the washroom to wash it off or anything. It's just like never mentioned again. That scene made absolutely no sense to me. I don't understand what the point of that was. Also, just the wording of it was awkward in itself. Like, she cackled and then dumped the drink on his head. It's just, I don't know if she was trying to depict Lou as a certain type of character, but I just think that was not a good scene. I think the biggest plot inconsistency that happens in the book is in the chapter An Unexpected Reunion. In this scene, Lou's old friend Bass comes with a group of marauders to rob the troop in the camp where they're staying. In the previous book, Lou had erased all of Bass's memories of her and their friend Coco so that he wouldn't be able to snitch to the chasseurs and tell them that they were witches. I want to specifically read to you the page in Serpent and Dove where this happens. Catching a web of patterns, I clenched my fists and sighed as my affectionate memories of Bass, the love I'd once felt, the warmth he'd once brought me, slipped into oblivion. The guards crumpled to the floor and the cords disappeared in a burst of shimmering dust. Memory for memory, the voice in my head crooned. A worthy price. It's better this way. So there we can see that the only thing Lou is giving up is her warm, happy memories of Bass. She isn't forgetting about him completely. She's just forgetting that they were ever in a loving romantic relationship. The next page, she tells us what she's doing exactly to Bass. When I finished, when the golden mist had stolen every memory of my face and Coco's face from his mind, Bass fell to the floor. So we see that she has taken all memory of her and Coco from Bass's mind, so he can't remember them at all, but she still remembers who he is. So now we get to the crux of the issue, which is the very strange thing that happens in this chapter. Here we have a scene where Bass is fighting Coco and he has a blade to her throat, and she says his name. Then he says, "How do you know my name?" "Because I know you," Coco says. Coco struggled harder, and the blade bit deeper. Bass's frown deepened inexplicably, as did my own. What was he doing? Why was he pretending not to know her? This sentence makes no sense, given the context of the first book. What was he doing? Why didn't he know her? Lou should know exactly why he didn't know her, because she had taken his memories. The only explanation for why she would have forgotten about this is if she had maybe sacrificed her memory of that event at some point to work a piece of magic. However, the book never explicitly states that she has given up this memory, so I have to take it that she should still have the memory, and it's an inconsistency between the first and second book. Editing Sarah here, I forgot to mention like the most annoying part of this scene, which is that Bass is just never mentioned again. They don't say where he goes after the fight happens. They don't show a scene of them like saying goodbye to each other after he gets his memories back. She just like forgets that he exists, and he's just like gone from the book forever. It's just like, no, show me some resolution. I didn't like that. Another thing that bothered me was the relationship between Beau and Reed. If you've read the book, you know that Reed was fathered by the king of the country and that the crown prince, Beau, is his half-brother. So throughout the book, Reed is asking Beau questions about the royal family, trying to get to know them, because in his mind he views them as the family he never knew he had. He's asking Beau what their father is like, to which Beau replies, "You know what he's like. Don't paint us like a fairy tale, Reed. We aren't one." Then Reed replies, "I've never had a family." And then Beau says, "And you still don't." He shook his head in exasperation, eyeing me as if I were a stupid child in need of admonishment. "I should have known you'd do this. I should have known you'd want to bond." Stepping closer, he stuck a finger in my chest. "Listen carefully, little brother. This isn't a family, it's a noose. And if this brilliant plan of yours goes awry, we'll all swing from it. You, me, Violette, Victoire, and every other poor bastard our father has fucked into existence. Make peace with it now, or we'll break your heart." So to me, this scene reads very clearly that Beau is not interested in forming a brotherly relationship with Reed. He might be interested in forming bonds of friendship, but he very clearly does not value the blood bonds that tie Reed to his family, and actually warns Reed against trying to forge these bonds because it will only lead to heartache. Despite this scene, Beau repeatedly refers to Reed as brother throughout the rest of the book, as do several other of his half-sibling characters, despite them never having met before, and it just struck me as a little bit odd that upon first meeting, some of these half-siblings would immediately call Reed their brother. Just realistically speaking, I don't think that would happen in real life. The final big issue that I have with this book happens during the chapter called Madame Sauvage's Cabinet of Curiosities. Now, in this book, there's a really pivotal fight scene that happens between Lou and Reed, where all of the underlying dark thoughts and opinions they have about each other come to light. In this scene, Lou argues about Reed's opinion of magic, specifically his low opinion and his inability to accept magic in both Lou and himself. The fight culminates in Lou revealing that she has concealed from Reed the fact that another one of his step-siblings was found dead at La Voisin Blood Witch's camp. In the following scene, after they separate, Reed becomes furious at this revelation. He realizes that Lou can never stop lying to him and that their trust is irreparably broken. He does admit that he still loves her, but he believes in his heart that Lou does not love him anymore. Now, these are huge issues. When I read this scene the first time around, I was cringing so hard because these characters were being so vicious with each other. It felt so toxic to me, and that scene in my mind confirmed to me that these characters were not right for each other. Now, the resolution that Mahurin provides for us does help ease a little bit of my concerns, but not fully. From Lou's point of view, she realizes in a scene that happens at yet another tavern, where she kind of goes off the rails a little bit and accidentally lights her friend Coco on fire. Thankfully, Coco's okay, but she realizes that she actually is a little bit more out of control than she had thought, and that the accusations that Reed had against her actually had some basis. My problem with this resolution for Lou is that in her mind, everything is her fault. It's her fault she's a witch. It's her fault she's reckless. It's her fault she's like her mother. This just felt very like, to me, it's the woman's job to change her character because she's not righteous or pure enough for her man. And I just don't love that. On the other side of things, the resolution that Reed has fell a little flat for me. There's basically a scene where him and Lou are watching the funeral procession of the Archbishop, and he just has an epiphany of sorts and realizes that he needs to stop blaming Lou for the problems in their relationship because he chose to be with her. And because he chose, he should just forgive the fact that she lied, forgive the fact that she does magic, because he chose to be in that situation. That also sounds very unhealthy to me. I do not think that your partner gets a free pass just because you've decided that you want to commit to that relationship. That's not healthy to me. I don't think that relationship would last because they didn't really talk at all about the fight. Earlier in the book, they even had a physical fight where they came to actual physical blows with each other. They don't talk about it. They don't talk about anything going on in their relationship. They just decide to have getting back together sex, and then everything is okay. No, sex does not solve all your problems. That was not done well. My final topic of conversation is the characters themselves, and I think here's where you really see most strongly the glaring difference between the characters in the first book and the characters in the second book. They all seem to have undergone these strange, undetermined personality changes. We don't really know why, doesn't really make a lot of sense, and the changes are not for the better. Firstly, we have Ansel. A big concern of mine, even in the first book, was his age in relation to the other characters. So multiple times, Lou mentions how young Ansel is. I had to do a little bit of sleuth work, and I think I figured out that he is 16. Lou and Coco are either 18 or 19. And then Reed is about 20 and Beau is about 21. So he's 2 years apart from Coco. And yet, to Lou, he is a child. She actually calls him a child in this book, and multiple times in the first book she says things like, oh, he's so young, he's so pure, he's so naive, things like that. And yet at the same time, she makes these inappropriate sexual comments like, oh, maybe I'll take his virginity as a gift. So it was very confusing to me why Lou was sexualizing Ansel in that way and yet also kept referring to him as a child. Also, the fact that she calls him a child and yet eggs along her friend Coco in a romantic relationship between the two of them. Why is he good enough for Coco, but he's too young for you? Didn't make a lot of sense. I really loved Ansel in the first book. I thought he was sweet, loving, accepting, Way beyond Reed, I think his ability for love and acceptance of the witches as a show in training showed how strong his moral character was, and I was really excited to read more about Ansel and see him kind of getting older and coming into himself as a person. This is done in a very strange way in the second book, in my opinion, where we get to see new aspects of him but in very strange lights, such as him chugging alcohol and saying, "Oh, I'm okay with drinking booze," or him in scenes bantering with Lou like the two are old friends and he's very confident and assured. Yet on the next page he feels insecure about his fighting ability and he asks Lou to train him. He just felt very shifting and uncertain, and not in like a he's trying to find himself way, but in a the author doesn't know what to do with him kind of way. Secondly, Madame Labelle. I do not understand why Madame Labelle was in this book. Can somebody please explain it to me? The first book, she had a very clear purpose. She was a character who performed actions that actively moved the plot along, and she provided a lot of emotional interactions for Reed and for other characters. It made sense for her to be there. In Blood and Honey, the only thing that Madame Labelle really does is point out to Reed how dangerous Lou is getting and how off the rails she's going. And that could have been done by literally any character. It didn't have to be her. There was no relationship growth between her and Reed in this book. There were no revelations about his past or his history. She was just a hanger-on, and I really would have preferred if she had just shown up at the end of the book at the climax scene or something, so that we could have devoted more page time to characters that I actually cared about and wanted to learn more about, like Ansel and Coco. Adding on to that is Beau. I really did not think there was a reason for Beau to be as present as he was in this book. It's true that Beau was there for some comedy relief, but honestly anybody could have played that role. Lou was our established comedian in the first book, and she could have been that person in the second book. Aside from being the comedy relief, it's true that Beau was there to provide a little bit of context about the royal family, but again, he didn't need to be present for the whole book for that to happen. That conversation could have happened at the end of the book, or it could have happened right at the top of the book, and then Beau could have gone off and done something else. There just was no real need for him to be there, and it factually didn't make any sense that he was just acting as not on behalf of the crown, but also as a representative of the crown. It was kind of like he himself didn't even know why he was there. He just wanted to be there on the off chance that he got to hook up with Coco. Why was he there? And as I mentioned, Lou was an amazing character in the first book. I loved how spunky and fun and entertaining she was. She was such a wild card. She had this mysterious past that she was keeping from Reed. There was a lot of intrigue surrounding her. That all kind of disappears in the second book. We know who she is, Reed knows, everybody knows. She is more depressed, she's kind of going off the rails, but not in an intriguing way, more in like a, I don't understand the motivation of why you're acting like this kind of way. So she just wasn't an interesting character to read about in this book. If you think about it, examples like the physical fight that she has with Reed, why did she do that? The Lou that I know from the first book would have never acted that way. There wasn't a lot of internal dialogue telling us why Lou would want to physically harm the man that she supposedly loves, and it just didn't make a lot of sense other than to try to scare the reader with how crazy Lou is getting. But I was like, yes, I can see she's getting crazy, but it doesn't make sense because I don't know why she's acting like this. Finally, Reed. He was a bit of a press in the first book, even for me to love him, and he did not improve in this book. The first book was nice because he starts off as this really stodgy, stalwart, uptight religious figure, but then as he slowly falls in love with Lou, he kind of sheds all of those layers, and we get to see the man he is underneath, or the man that he would want to be in a different world. In this book, on the other hand, he's just kind of like an overprotective, controlling boyfriend. He's a bit annoying. He's constantly demanding answers from Lou, as if he has the right to know everything that she's thinking, as if she doesn't have a choice whether or not she can tell him things. I just found him very aggravating, and he was not a sexy main character for me. There was, even during the 2 sex scenes in the book, I was not emotionally invested or anything in either of those scenes. I skimmed them both because I just do not care about their relationship. I really didn't see a lot of internal growth with Reed. He just kind of has that epiphany later in the book. We don't know why he has this epiphany other than Thierry, I think, says to him, oh, magic is bad if you use it for bad, but it can be good if you use it for good. And that's apparently all Reed needs. He doesn't care what his wife says, the person that he supposedly trusts and loves. Doesn't matter what she tells him. No, it has to be the stranger from the circus telling him that magic can be good for Reed to actually believe it. It's just like, what the hell, dude? What's your problem? Why don't you trust her? It's very clear, in fact, that he doesn't trust her, which again just makes me think this relationship could never work long term. I also do want to give a brief mention to 2 more characters, Coco and Gabby. So Coco, I loved in the first book, and I was really excited to see more of her in this book. I loved the mention of her relationship with Babette, and I really wish more scene time had been gone into that and exploring interactions between Coco and Babette, maybe some comforting or some dialogue, anything. Throw me a freaking bone. There was none of that. It was just a little like offhand comment here and there from Lou. I just really wanted more spice from Coco, and Mahurin did not deliver. Finally, Gabrielle Gilly, the little 7 or 8-year-old half-sibling of Reed that we meet in the Blood Witches camp. What the fuck was this character? Let me just read you a page from when we're introduced to her. So just remember, this little girl is 7 or 8 years old, and this is the first time she is meeting these characters.
My name is Gabrielle Gilly, and you are even shorter than they said. Practically elfin. Tell me, how you kiss my brother? I heard he's as tall as this evergreen. I suppose I should call him my half-brother, though, shouldn't I? Maman doesn't like you being here. She doesn't like me knowing about him, but she's gone for the moment, and I don't really care what she thinks anyway. What's he like? Does he have red hair? Nicolina told me he has red hair, but I don't like Nicolina very much. She thinks she's so clever, but really she's just weird. Too many hearts, you know.
And that's the first time we hear from her. And she just gets increasingly more weird and says more freaky deaky stuff as the story progresses. And it's just like, who is this strange little girl and why does she talk like that? She sounds like the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland. She's supposed to be a 7-year-old little girl? No, I don't think so. More like she's a cuckoo from Cuckoo Land. So as you can see, the large number of inconsistencies in plot, setting, characters, and language between the first and second books really takes it from a here to a here. I'm honestly quite disappointed in how this book turned out. I ended up giving it a 2 out of 5 star rating. The first time I read Serpent and Dove, I gave it a 4-star rating, and then I ended up doing a rereading this time around before I read Blood and Honey, and I ended up lowering it just a little bit to a 3.5. This book was just the whole cake of disappointment. I had my cake, I ate it, and I was disappointed, and I would just really, really love for the final installment of this series to be better. Mahurin, please do better. Thank you so much for watching. If you got this far and you made it to the end of the video, please let me know in the comments below if you read this book, what you thought, if you agree with my opinions, or if you have anything you want to add. Let me know in the comments below. I would love to have a discussion and talk more about this book. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye. I just had to show you guys this. Ignore the glare. Can y'all see the shadows from the clouds on the mountains? I feel like I'm in a Studio Ghibli movie right now. Oh my god. And then a beautiful bird flies by. It's just... God, I love Vancouver. That's gorgeous.